Okay, with this round, I'll start with Di. The Export Council of Australia does an extraordinary job, not only in export policy, training exporters and creating opportunities, but also in terms of lobbying government and trying to get constructive changes to export policies. And this year, of course, the Export Council of Australia in the Premier's Export Awards particularly celebrated the relationship between China and Australia from an export perspective. So, Di, how does ECA see the China market and where does it fit in our broader export scenario?
Thank you, Jim. China's very, very important, and I don't need to repeat a lot of the things that Andrew said. It's our biggest trading partner, both in import and export. We really do need to think about how we can build on that and how we can build our trade capacity with China. The free trade agreement is a great tool to make that work. Andrew mentioned about the duties on particular products into China. Wine, for instance, is, as of this year, is a nil duty into China. So we have a great advantage, not just in wine, but in a lot of products. We have wonderful manufacturing products that are very advanced. We have some wonderful growth centres the Australian government has put quite a bit of money into to ensure that we look at agriculture, we look at advanced manufacturing, we look at cybersecurity, telecommunications, health, all of the things that other countries want, particularly China. We import a lot from China, but, you know, at the end of the day, trade is about in and out. It's about building up capacity and making sure that when we buy things, we're also selling things. We can't always rely on rocks and crops forever. We need to consider other products and other items of goods that we need to sell, and services. Services are critical to our future relationship with China. We have health tech, we have biotech, we have med tech, we have all of these technology advances that we've built up in Australia. We're one of the best countries in the world for those advances. We need to make sure we harness those ideas and assist exporters into getting into other markets, not just China, but China today is the focus, and I really believe China is going to remain our first trading partner for a long, long time to come.
If I could just ask one quick supplementary. The winners of the Export Awards are not all exporters of products, and Andrew raised the fact that the CHAFTA agreement really does open the services market. Have you seen any movement with the members of the Export Council of Australia in terms of services opportunities? We know about the lawyers, but the other sort of services that can back up industry.
The winner of the New South Wales Export Award, which was interesting, was a services company. It was an insurance platform called Cover Genius. And this is quite remarkable in an array of 160 applications, that probably the percentage of exporters in those applications were service providers. We still do a lot of goods trade, as I said, our rocks and crops, but it's really quite comforting to know that we're also looking at the services, and that the winners in quite a number of categories were service exporters. Another thing I wanted to just quickly chat about was the reputation that Australia has. We have a wonderful reputation of clean, green, and environmentally sort of sustainable in the way that we look at our products. So I'm talking back about trade goods now. But you know, we need to keep that. We need to ensure that we remain very much at the forefront of that type of innovation. That takes a lot of services. We need to make sure those services are needed overseas as well. So we need to stay green and clean, but we do have competition, and although we have a great trade agreement, there are other countries. I think, Andrew, you mentioned Chile. They're pretty much at the same level of us in a lot of our duty rates into China now. So we need to make sure we stay pretty much ahead of all of that. Part of what we do at the Export Council is encourage exporters to look at particular countries. China seems to be the one that everyone walks in and says, we want to go to China. That's great. We need to build on that. We need to make sure that we train and keep people aware of what the FTAs, the free trade agreements, are all about, particularly the chapter. The interesting thing is that a lot of people don't realise the free trade agreement is there until you actually tell them. Then they take a really great advantage on that. They really do get an advantage. They're willing to trade with China even without that, but that advantage of the free trade agreement makes it so much easier for them to get into that market.
Well, I suppose now is Oswan Wendy Mao will tell us about her business.
Okay, it's a big honor to be here, to represent Australian wine industry. And before, talk about our story, I would like to say thank you to the Home and Europe to sign the chapter. I think it's a beautiful agreement. 5 years past, we can all see, we can all witness the great achievement the chapter has brought to Australia. Because I'm in one industry, so I just would like to focus on one industry. I can still remember the low tide, between 2011 to 2014. At that time, a lot of wineries actually went broke. That also was the time we entered Australian wine industry. And at that time, we bought our wineries at very good price, because a lot of, big players in Australian wine industries, they wanted to get rid of some of the assets to pass the hardest time. So we think it won't be too much if we say the chapter has saved Australian wine industry. I think that would be a very fair comment. From 2015, after the chapter was signed, the tariff has been down from 14% to 0 this year. I think it does help with the export of Australian wine. If you read the financial reports of Treasury Group, which is Penfold, I think most of you may know Penfold. If you look at their financial report, it would say the progress, the big achievement chapter has helped us to do. As an Australian wine player, from 2011 when we came into this wine industry, and we have grown up from 2015 to 2019 10 times to 40 million Australian dollar sales in China. So we think without the help of chapter, we could not have done that. And today, we are also very happy to become the sponsor, and tonight you can also, taste our wine to say if you like our wines. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Wendy. Actually, I'm very interested to say if you have increased so much of your export, and of course your income will be increased.
Yeah, I think it's nearly 10 times, I think.
Yes, in that case, it means it has benefited our employment situation a lot. So how much expansion do you have in your employment situation?
I think at the beginning, we just started from two people, or three people, I should say. May, my husband, Wei Li, you may know him, and also another guy who's from Australian Vintage Group. When we bought this business from Australian Vintage Group, we started from 3 people. Now we have more than 300 staff. Yeah.
Wow, 100 times more.
300, 100 times.
Do you notice any other increase in other wine industries?
I think, Australian immigration policy is also playing a very important role. A lot of, new migrants, when they come to Australia, they would do some business, and they also, export a lot of wines to China. It's another very important thing, I think.
Could I make an observation about you get an agreement like the chapter, and it helps the relationship. As I said, at a commercial level, it's been outstanding. The friendship and the ease of, business is never easy, but working together and getting outcomes has been. The evidence is there for everyone to see, the success of it. But it also leads to other agreements. The chapter success in 2015 led within a couple of years to an open skies agreement between Australia and China. Now, a lot of people don't hear about this, But, you know, it's not that long ago, 7 or 8 years ago, we had about 40 flights a week going directly into different cities in China. A lot of those direct flights were Shanghai and Beijing and Guangzhou. Now we've got well over 200 flights. I think it's about 220 flights from the last report I had, direct flights from Australia into China. Now that has made a very remarkable difference, as you can imagine. Connectivity opens up the world. The US, after World War II, built a highway all the way around the US. It was more for security purposes, but it turned out to be a means of opening up America to itself. They got access to all those Midwest towns and all the rest. China has now built 30,000 kilometres of very fast rail. China has opened up itself with the rail, and of course we get the benefit of that too. We fly into some part or we ship into some part and things get put on the very fast rail to take it somewhere else. But that airline flight, now in the belly of those big aircraft, we not only have doubled the amount of tourists coming to Australia from about 700,000 to 1.4 million in the last 7 or 8 years, but underneath all the tourists, there's a lot of technology and capability for the transport of high-value produce with a lot of frozen materials and other things. And of course, flying into lots of these directly into lots of different parts of China also is helping services. People can do a fly-in, fly-out arrangement with services, whereas previously they'd have to go and take out more permanent accommodation and do other things. So it's at the margin, these things are having a really major impact, and we just need to be aware of the opportunity that's being presented across all these different forms of transport, etc., etc.
Could I support that? Sorry, I'm talking about the Export Awards again, but in Western Australia, the winner of the WA Export Awards was Geraldton Port Authority. They are flying 200, minimum a day, 200 live lobsters from Geraldton, which is 5 hours from Perth. They're taking it down to Perth, flying it across to Shanghai. It's arriving within the 24 hours, in less than 24 hours, and on the tables, live lobster. Not on the tables, but you know what I mean. In the restaurants, ready for eating. Thank you.
Yeah, obviously, Chinese people like live lobster.
Not only is more fresh, actually, I find it cheaper overseas than local prices.
Andrew, one of the interesting elements of the China Free Trade Agreement was the success in getting access in the healthcare area in China. We have sometimes the politicians are criticised for our healthcare systems, but we really have very good healthcare systems in this country, and the technology to support the health industry. What's your view about the opportunities? I know this was one area of the agreement you were particularly keen on. So what's happened in the health sector since CHAFTA?
Well, first and foremost, within China, it's become pretty much the number one priority for the President, the healthcare system. And for good reason. I've personally experienced the healthcare system when I had a problem at one stage in China. And I've got to say, China is now as good as any country in so many areas and better than most. But in health, it's still third world. It's still third world. And there are political reasons for that. There are things there are incentives for no change in many hospitals and things, which I won't bore you with. But the fact of the matter is, Chinese are now demanding, as their quality of life improves in every other dimension, they're now demanding world's best healthcare. And the opportunities for us, because we have got a global reputation in healthcare as first world, very high quality. In fact, we've got the fifth biggest health precinct in the world in Melbourne with the Melbourne Biological Centre, which involves about 15 hospitals and Melbourne University, etc., etc. So our reputation is gold standard. And as you move around China, our reputation in health is gold standard, right? So it does, not as our health service people have to go and really sell themselves in terms of being world quality, right? That's assumed. Then it's just a question of price and application. But there are enormous opportunities. The biggest growth area now in our services trade is certainly health at the moment. And the model I mentioned during my few comments, companies, some of them came in and bought 100% and they failed because they didn't know how to do business in Australia. It's just like if we go into China and buy 100% of a business, more often than not we'll fail. Not because, we're all equally smart potentially, but just that you don't know how to do business, right? And you're picking the right partner, no matter which way you go, whether we go to China or Chinese come to Australia. Firstly, getting the right partner locally is number one and very, very critical. But secondly, in the health space, there are lots of opportunities now where, because we've got both a public and private, we're 50-50, our health system, public-private. And that model is starting to take hold in China. In Beijing, there's a lot of things they're experimenting with, lots of different health systems. In Beijing, they're starting to do a public-private like ours. So if you haven't got a lot of money, you get a base treatment. If you've got more money, you can get gold taps in your room, and it can go up. But you're still fundamentally getting a solid health treatment. So I think to come here to invest, even if it's 30 or 40%, you don't have to have a controlling interest. I can give you many examples where Chinese companies have come in, invested 30 or 40%, they become a principal shareholder at that level, and they have a lot of influence, but the capital that they bring in can give enormous growth opportunities in Australia, and then as it grows, they get to learn how to run the business, and then, within a reasonable period of time, they're well placed to take that IP, to take that business back into China and to run the business both in China and in Australia. So it's a risk, not risk-free, but it's a far less risky approach to take. It's a stepwise process, but it also means that we get the best of both countries in delivering the health services back into China.
All right, back to you.
Well, I think we're just about time that we have to close this panel discussion again. I wish we had more time. So is there any more last comment? Wendy? Okay, thanks very much, Diane and Wendy. We have the next panelist coming.
Thank you again to Ms. Wendy Mao from Swan Group and Ms. Diane Tipping from Export Council. Next, we'll be moving on to the next panel discussion, which will be speaking about 5 years chapter, culture and art. We'll be welcoming Ms. Casey Huo from the Australian Everbright Overseas Investment and Mr. Ian Tan from Rudder & Tan Consulting Group.